Always been contradictory and against the tide. That's my true nature. So I'm reminded of Ramana Maharishi, who, when his mother died, he clapped his hands and danced and said, "She has been liberated," and everybody was very shocked. So in some senses, the theological assumption that someone who has led such a long life, 88 years, and has been with us and has always communicated that sense of the wonder of things. So I think that's what I enjoyed most about Professor Oommen. As Maitrayee pointed out, we were very much in awe of him when we were 20 years old. We thought he was a very old man. At 20, we really thought 40 was very old, 45 was ancient. So when I met Jeet Singh and he was 45, he had grey hair, we thought he was very ancient. So obviously my attitude to life cycle and age sets has changed a lot. And I do not think the same way, because now I'm closer to 70 than I ever was. So I would like to say that what he communicated was this love for Durkheimian sociology as much as for Weber, as much as for Marx. And he was able to do this in a flawless way. So we listened hypnotized. We watched, we didn't even take notes. And yet, though we never asked a question, he didn't even know us by name personally, really. There were 25 of us. He came to class, he gave his lecture, and then he left. So it was a podium presence. But what he taught us was how to think. So I spent my entire semester thinking about what about the individual, what happens to the individual, because his statistical sense of reality was from Durkheim's book on suicide. So for him that was very, very important in terms of how these statistics were made available by the governments of those countries. For him, his sensibility was really in terms of numbers. And even as late as, I would say, 2021, he gave a lecture before COVID to our students, where he said, how can the individual change society? I mean, he was a Weberian, but he was curious about how can you insert the individual back. And I was quite shocked, because I had spent all my 20s, the years when one's writing one's thesis, thinking about the place of the individual in the statistic. And that is what made me a sociologist. And I think that trauma that he felt about M.N. Srinivas asking him to work on the Syrian Christians probably carried over into our relationship. Because I wrote a thesis on the Syrian Christians. I went to Delhi school to do that, because I had worked with 18 case studies during my BA years, 3 years, and 18 case studies read from cover to cover. That was a syllabus. So I think for him, the animosity, the tension, perhaps the vulnerabilities of how we look at our disciplines, because both of us were workaholics, so questions of that workaholism was total. So the questions that we raise about the past or about the present, I feel his presence very much. In the Jacobite tradition, of which I'm not a member, they say the spirit roams for 40 days, visiting friends, visiting family, communicating that the spirit is quick, as Jesus said. So there is a distinction between the dead and the quick. I think Professor Oommen will always be quick. So in some senses, the laughter, the sensibilities, the ways in which he communicated to us, that each of us was important to him. And Maitrayee has said that very, very clearly. So I was astounded when I was 45 years old, trying to get my professorship. As women, we stayed in the department as keepers of house and home. The men traveled, the men were continually on the move. The women had to be there in order to make sure the institution was stable. And at the age of 46, he's asking me, would you consider yourself a sociologist of religion? And I was really deeply shocked. So then I thought, this is the man who wrote the Review of Christians of Kerala. And that happened because his neighbor was the editor of the book review. So for 18 years, I had not met Professor Oommen. And when I did go back in 97 as a teacher, my instinct was something that perhaps I can refer to as a transcendent love. I didn't know the man. I didn't have an interaction with him. I didn't really communicate what he meant to me as a teacher, because that's how it was. Just as you stayed clear of your father, in the same way you stayed clear of your teachers. So Baap Khatra Hai is something very well known. to everyone. So he was a father figure. When I saw Ratish carrying his coffin, I thought this is, because I was watching it on cyberspace, I thought this is how it was for all of us. That he was in some senses there for us, he communicated it, yet there was an aloofness. So the very basis of our interactions were very minimal. I think he was always in a hurry, he was always going to some meeting, just as the elders did today. There was always something to do. He was coming from somewhere, going somewhere, and we would meet in the corridor. I would always be very happy to see him. He gave me my job. He gave my husband the ICSR fellowship. So obviously, we were very grateful to him. These things happened, so it was not about anything, but the fact of his professionalism, the sense that he could mark out categories and make it very clear. So I know that when Professor Madan asked me at my interview, are you a mystic? I told him, that's for you to say. I was quite aghast by that question at my interview. I mean, where was it coming from? But I was astute enough to say I cannot alienate these people. And Professor Dipankar asked me, do you believe in phallic supremacy? And I said, I'm a Jungian. So when one goes to interviews, I think many of us, I was one of the lucky ones. I went to four interviews all my life because finally there were places which were looking for people, so it happened, whether it was Brandhouse, Hindu College, JNU. But I know others who had to go through the enormous indignity of going to interview after interview. And Professor Oommen was totally non-judgmental. So he was there, I think, as the representative of the department, and Dipankar was the chair. And academic life is about internecine warfare. It's continuous. There's never any break. But on the other hand, there's collegiality, friendship, affection, which transcends all of these. And once he told me that he never took offense to anything that Professor Yogendra might say or do because Professor Yogendra Singh had hired him. So there were these two great characters. There was a third man, he was a saint. And that was Professor Venugopal. So these two people, Professor Yogendra Singh and Professor Oommen, they did everything in a symbiotic way, but the department was divided like armies marching. There were three of us at that time, Maitrayee, Tiplut and myself. And we just could not fathom how we could negotiate between the two sides, the two phalanx. And that was actually transcended by our age set because we liked both our teachers. We liked Levi and we liked T.K. Oommen, and we were friendly and happy to be in the center. But the idea that armies marching is a continuous experience and we will never overcome it. And we must go on with the business of what Maitrayee said, institutional building. It meant that collegiality had to be there. It meant that in front of us students, we could not represent the factionalism, the warriorhood, the ways in which people represent their perspectives in very, very vivid ways. And I think Mrs. Oommen was a very kind and gentle person who came to every faculty lunch, every faculty dinner, which was organized in honor of someone entering the system or retiring. Such a graceful person. Often men, academics, are like absentee landlords. And really, in terms of how the women support the system and the family is really of crucial emphasis. I think Vivek had said about the fact that Mrs. Oommen said that division of labor should be equal. And in some senses, that was the freedom of speech that she had. And she would always communicate what she felt and how she felt in very, very clear terms. Nobody was ever in any doubt about the wit and the intelligence and the beauty of that lady. So I think we're all here to provide support to the family. I cannot tell you how wonderful their sons have been in relationship to their father, how much he loved them. And the space is set up in terms of the extended family because I saw it in a very limited way. At the hospital, I was in town briefly. I happened to be there when he was out of ICU. And the tenacity of the family who supported him through his entire working life, which was very long. And Professor Oommen was exactly as has been described, what kind of taxis did he travel in, what kind of roads did he travel in, what kind of dingy hotels and guest houses, university guest houses did he travel in. Same with Yoginder Singh. There was no cattle class for them. They were with the people, of the people, and they did all that they could to make sociology present and valid in every small town, in every hinterland university, right up to the age of 84 or 85. So there's a lot to learn from that space itself, the kind of sacrifices the family made, and the ways in which Professor Oommen and Professor Yoginder Singh, because we always thought of them symbiotically, because the CSSS was made possible for so many decades, right up to COVID, only because of their tenacity and the way in which they could come every semester to give a talk. And I think that was important. I think we enjoyed that because we could see, as Maitrayee said, how much they had changed from the way that we met them as 20-year-olds and the way that we saw them perform. So adaptive, where Professor Yoginder Singh would say, you can survive only if you adapt. So thank you for inviting me, and I'm really grateful. Wonderful to see my colleagues again, and so happy that I could be here.